our first major topic has to do with false prophets. Now, we're going to talk about this a lot, but we're going to note that this is a very specific thing. This is something that Jesus' audience would have had a very clear cultural idea of. This wouldn't be just kind of a loosey-goosey general religious person idea. The prophet was a position in Israelite culture and a part of God's plan. So these false prophets are important to us. And it starts with this admonition to beware. Or we could say, be on watch for, be looking out for, be checking out and examining things. And generally speaking, if there is a warning like this, it's because there is a purpose, that these false prophets would be coming along. They were certainly coming along during Christ's earthly ministry, and as we'll see, that goes forward into the next age. But the word pseudo-prophetes is our Greek word for false prophets. And I only bring that up because that is a very easily recognizable. Pseudo, if we talk about, we hear the phrase a lot, pseudoscience or someone's pseudo-intellectual, and we mean it's a false science or a false intellectualism, something posing as something that it's really not. And in this case, prophetes, right, is where we get our English word prophet. So we have to ask, in this context, what did it mean to be a prophet? And then what did it mean for someone to be a false prophet? Well, a prophet, a Jewish prophet specifically, spoke for God. Not just any God, not just a spiritual force, but spoke for and represented the thoughts, intentions, desires, and commands of the God of the universe, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, and in this context was expected to speak for and represent God. So a false prophet is one who claims to speak for God, claims to be getting revelation from God to share with the people, but in fact is either getting that information from some demonic source or perhaps from just themselves, internally, thinking, this is what I think, so that's probably what God's telling me to say. Which is always a dangerous thing. Anytime you take that voice in your head and you say, that's probably God's voice, you have to realize that you just made yourself the God of your own life, and that's a very bad position to be in. So a false prophet is one who claims to speak for God, and this is not a new idea. Jesus didn't just come up with this or reveal this here. The false prophet were to be expected all the way back into the law of Moses. Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5 says, if there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So, here the Lord is giving two major tests for prophets. First of all, they're going to make near-term prophecies or predictions, and if those come true, that's a positive sign. But that's only a positive sign for the second far greater test, and that is what the prophet is saying consistent with the revelation of God. And so, even if they could do a miracle by some means, whether that's, again, demonic or deception, that they would still, if they are causing people or calling people to worship other gods, to violate the Lord's clear command, then they are to come to an ultimate and gory end. They're ultimately, as we're told in verse 5, but that prophet or dreamer of dreams shall be put to death because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God. So, we want to note that the stakes were high. And we'd say, why in the world are the stakes that high? I mean, goodness gracious, can you imagine if we stoned preachers for preaching wrong? It would be a far less populated profession than it is. And yet, it is because these prophets were claiming to speak in the name of God that ultimate capital punishment was needed. It is a grave and serious thing to speak in the name of the God of Israel. And it was clearly understood that whatever the Lord would say, they were meant to respond to and obey and listen to. We move forward, so this is obviously, again, this is the false prophet that Jesus is talking about in their context. They would have understood this, and he's giving them a little bit more information. However, we want to note that as this generation stood potentially to be the final generation that before the millennial kingdom, that there was false prophets, or there are false prophets coming in the tribulation period as well. And Revelation 13 outlines that. We've seen by this point in Revelation the beast that comes from the sea, the Antichrist has come up, and now we see that there's a false prophet on the scene. It says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived." It goes on to talk about the great power that he's granted. So in other words, in this tribulation period, as we move forward, not only do we have the Antichrist, but he also raises up a false prophet that can do many amazing signs and wonders that people will not be able to believe. They'll be shocked by the incredible display of power. And the people who live on the earth, that is, the people who dwell on the earth, is one of John's expressions for the unsaved. They will be deceived. So what's Jesus saying? He is here presenting the kingdom. Had they accepted him as Messiah, they would go immediately or almost immediately into the 7-year tribulation, and he'd be telling them, look out. There will be false prophets of amazing power and magnitude and influence, and they would deceive even you if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention. So within the context of Jesus' audience, this all would have made a lot of sense, and it absolutely would have been something that they needed to hear, because lying signs and lying prophets and lying wonders were eminent upon the earth.